would you describe yourself as someone who is addicted's a big word, but is highly participatory in your social media?
Yeah. Well,
and how many social media accounts do you personally have? I don't mean our show. I don't mean anything. Just the ones that you are on.
I don't.
You have none?
Because I don't enter into. I have them all, but I do them for research. I want to see what's trending, what people are talking about, but I don't post.
And you don't really look at comments?
I don't. No, I don't. You know.
So I have 3. I had 4. I got off of a big one. I have Instagram. I have Threads. And I have the new one I joined was Blue Sky. And the thing that makes me crazy is at some point every week my iPad will say to me how much screen time I've had this week and whether it's up or down from the week before. And first of all, it makes me crazy that it's watching me.
Well, it's hello, no kidding.
And I guess it's not making a judgment about it, but it feels very judgmental when it's telling me I'm up or down from my use the week before.
The funny thing is it tells you your time spent with the subtext of watch out, just make sure you're not doing too much. And at the same time, it's going, we got to get this up.
Yeah.
We got to get this up again.
But here's why I bring it up, because I don't think I'm overly engaged with social media. I don't really think I participate all that much. And yet, it gets into the just shy of 9 hours a week is basically what it's telling me. And I go, I'm on that thing 9 hours a week. So if I, who am not plugged in as a 65-year-old man, I'm not plugged into this stuff. I don't really care about this stuff. I get my news from traditional media. Imagine being a teenager whose entire world.
Well, that's the point. The point is, and that's what I wanted to talk to an expert about, as far as what this ban's going to look like, and just how damaging or not damaging is social media. Because it's funny, all these middle-aged guys in Congress, all these middle-aged politicians are the ones trying to figure this out.
Right.
When they don't understand that the generation that's doing it,
that they're protecting.
That they're protecting. It's their community. It's their engagement. It's their entertainment. It's their music.
It's their news source.
It's their news source. It's their everything. And why wouldn't it be?
Right.
And then the big question for me with this specialist is, isn't there a spectrum? Like, aren't there kids who are just destroyed by social media, devastated by it? We know.
Sure, we hear about it all the time.
We hear about it all the time, and it's even suicidal. Mm-hmm. Then there's some maybe that are neutral about it, and then maybe there's some who are honor students who are using it to do content, to learn stuff. So all of a sudden, the ban across the board would seem to be counterintuitive and a bludgeon for something that there has to be, and this is the hard part, what are the solutions to make it better for those kids who are devastated by it?
With that, we have a fascinating guest today, Professor Jacqueline. Is it Nessie? Is that
I would
the
assume.
Pronunciation? She's assistant professor at Brown University, who studies technology use and how it affects kids and how parents can help. And her writing has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. Let's welcome Professor Jacqueline Nessie.
Really? No, really? Really? No, really? Really?
Is it Nessie? Am I saying it right?
It's actually Nisi.
Nisi. Welcome, Professor Jacqueline Nisi.
You need to add another
Thank
E.
you so much.
You need to add another
I know,
E. What is that about?
I know. It's confusing. I would say about half of my friends also don't know how to pronounce it, so it's okay.
Well, because your name is obviously spelled incorrectly.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
well, welcome to our little program. So we began by chatting about, and we'll get into many things, I'm sure, but I want to start with, as I'm sure you're aware, the country of Australia has stated that they are going to ban social media for people under the age of 16 starting next year. And we wanted to, first of all, get your thoughts about whether that's a net positive or a net neutral or negative. And if you have any understanding, because we surely do not, on what the mechanism would be to actually enforce that. How would they track who's abiding by it and who's not? So is it, What's your take on whether this is even a good thing to be pursuing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so this is, just backing up a little bit, I'll
Sure.
say that the research on the link between social media and mental health, which is the thing that's kind of driving a lot of these bans and movements to change things, the research is a little bit mixed, actually. It's not so as clear cut as we would think. That said, there's generally pretty widespread agreement that these platforms do have problems, right? Like they're not designed optimally for young people and young people's well-being. And so I think there's two generally schools of thought about how to address that. One is, let's make changes to the platforms themselves to make them safer, healthier, better for kids. The other school of thought is, let's keep them off altogether, right? And so obviously that is what Australia has started taking steps to do, and specifically for kids under the age of 16. So yeah, I think so. On the one hand, I think you could argue that you have to set the age somewhere, right? Like you have to set the age at which kids can access it at some point. And in the US, it's effectively, based on the laws that we have, it's effectively 13. And Australia has said, this should be 16. So that could be, an argument. But there are a lot of issues that this brings up, as you already alluded to. So one is, how do you even define social media, right? Like what platforms would even be considered social media for this type of ban? Is it just the most popular ones? Is it others? Does it include every website where kids can interact with each other socially? Like that seems to include too many things. The second is, how do you enforce it? Like you said. So there's some talk of age verification. Like, how are you going to know whether kids are actually 16 to get on?
I was going to say, because I was joking about, the porn sites have a thing that says I am 18 or older or I am not. And all you do is hit a button. I mean, it's not, no one's like checking.
Yeah. And I think it's just it's a really tricky issue. And I don't think that we have a good solution in terms of how to do age verification. Not that it couldn't be developed, but how to do it in a way that protects privacy and that people feel comfortable with. I think the biggest issue, though, actually, is that by putting a ban in place, it kind of replaces the need to actually make changes to these platforms.
Right.
So, so we know that there are changes that could be made, maybe should be made, to make them safer and better for kids. And if there's a ban in place, then the platforms can just say, oh, well, the kids shouldn't be on there anyway. So, so what do we have to worry about? We don't need to be making these changes.
Well, Dr. Nisi,
and then they actually become less safe for kids as a result.
And the other question I have for you, when you're studying teens, not every teen is destroyed by TikTok. Some flourish because of that. Some use that for their groups. They use that for communication. They use it for everything. And you would push some kids into more isolation. So there's potential negatives for a whole group of kids that we don't talk about that benefit from it. Some are neutral. We always talk about the kids who are damaged by that. Is there a spectrum of kids that do benefit from this, or are we not sure yet? Does this cause depression in teenagers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's kind of the question that's at the heart of a lot of these debates, because the narrative around social media and kids' mental health is obviously really negative. Like what we hear about it is that this is bad and that the science is settled on this. Like we know it's bad. But I think the research we do have actually doesn't really support that kind of simple story. Like, as you said, social media is a lot of different things, first of all. So there's a lot of different ways that it can be used. Some may be beneficial, some certainly harmful. And then, of course, kids are very different from each other, right? So, kids are using these platforms in very different ways. Some kids, as you mentioned, maybe those who might be more marginalized somehow in their, offline lives, may actually be getting some benefit from the platforms, finding community on there. And so kids are going to be affected in different ways by the platforms. And that makes it hard, I think, to determine, what is the best way to regulate these platforms, to make them safer, to make them better, knowing that the impacts really differ for different kids. And that there may be good that's coming out of the platforms for some kids.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me, working in a business that is 90% adults and 10% minors, it just struck me that we have some of the same issues in my own business about the social media was not specifically designed for teens and youngsters. It was designed for really probably more adult interaction. I don't mean that adult topics, but adults using it. I don't know how we have just gotten around to trying to figure out practices within my industry to make a safer environment for the children that work in it. And that's when we can see them and they're hands-on, and it's very limited exposure, and we can sort of navigate what they do and don't do during their workday. I cannot imagine what mechanics could be put in place that does not interfere with the adult responsible use of a social media site, and yet still provides protections. I mean, are you aware of any of the things they're thinking about that might be considered protective for young people?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really good parallel, I think. Another analogy that I think you hear sometimes around this is for cars and driving. That, when it comes to driving and cars, we have regulations in place to make cars generally safer. And we have special protections in place to make sure they're especially safe. We have car seats for kids.
Right.
And then when kids are learning how to drive, we have driver's ed. And it's a gradual process, and they have to get a license. And so we have some of these protections in place to make it a safer and better thing for kids.
Right.
In terms of some of the specific proposals, so actually in the US, there are many different proposals out there, some at the federal level, many at the state level, looking to make some kind of changes to social media platforms. I don't think we've landed on a perfect answer, but some of the things that are in consideration are things like default privacy settings. So making sure that kids are not being automated into public profiles where anyone can contact them or see their information, right? Like making sure that they have more privacy, putting more protections in place for parental controls. So letting parents and kids themselves customize their experience a little bit more on the platforms. And then, generally kind of creating a duty for these platforms to protect kids from harms. So things like really problematic content, like, content that promotes self-harm or eating disorders or things that we just obviously would not want kids seeing. Protections in place to prevent kids from seeing that kind of thing. So there's, and what you said about, how can we do this without infringing on adults and what adults want to do? I think that is one of the really problematic and tricky things about this is like, how do you, there's some argument that there should be changes made to the platforms for everybody, just that they should generally be, more safe places and places where there's more transparency about how your data is being collected and used, where you have more options to customize, the algorithms that are feeding you content and those kinds of things. And maybe there should be changes made for everyone. And then there's arguments around, of course, like these should be limited to minors. And do we have ways that we can actually make that happen to know who those minors are and then put the right protections in place?
But here's a question, and I don't know if you said it or I read it somewhere that was really an interesting way to put it. And this really kind of underlines the problem with how do you restrict this. It's content that makes you feel bad about yourself. So kids, when they get triggered, it's content that makes them feel bad about themselves. But that could be a YouTube instructional video, like you said, did something about self-image that makes this kid feel bad about themselves or this adult feel bad about themselves, but not this. So then you're talking about freedom of speech. And there's so much misinformation out there that also is guised under the headline of, but I'm allowed to say this because that's my opinion, rather than. So I don't know when these companies are ever going to give us, as they grow bigger and bigger and bigger, where they're going to agree on transparency, because that's what this is really about. Here's the algorithm, here's what it is, anger and fear engages, so we're going to stop doing that. I don't think until they find something that engages as powerfully as what they're doing now, because I mean, Google, since they started, it's a big experiment on how to get engagement. Is this button better than that button? Is this color? So it's a constant experiment to keep you there.
Well, so to that end, I think what you're asking is, anecdotally, in your experience, are the companies generally receptive to the idea of making these changes, or is this something that they just feel is detrimental to them?
I don't know how the companies themselves feel. I guess we would have to ask them. I think there's competing interests in place in terms of what are the things that are going to increase the bottom line, and then what are the things that are maybe going to be we think going to be better for kids, but maybe decrease engagement or decrease the amount of time they're spending or that kind of thing. What you were saying made me think as well. There's one thing that I think does make sense is, if nothing else, giving everyone, not just kids, the option to, as I think I had mentioned, customize the experience a little more. And what that might mean is there might actually be features in there. Like on YouTube, there's a feature called autoplay, as you probably know, where as soon as a video ends, another one starts. And we know that autoplay makes it so that kids and adults are likely to spend a lot more time on there. But if there should be an option, and in YouTube there actually is, to turn that off, right? And simple changes like that, I think, would actually go a long way in terms of both the features that kids have and are using, but also the content. If they could make, more decisions around what their algorithm is showing them, what they want to see more of, and we knew that those were actually that those choices were actually effective in terms of changing the content they were seeing, I think that could go a long way as well.
But is there any danger in, and I totally get why that's a positive, but is there any danger that you are effectively putting blinders on a young person because they're only exposing themselves to things that are giving them what they want, as opposed to offering an opposing opinion or a different idea or a different perspective? Would there not be a downside to that kind of
certainly I think there could be a downside. That's why I think that with any change or solution that we talk about here, I do think that some amount of media literacy training is necessary. And that just meaning we need to be teaching kids about healthy and safe ways to use these platforms, right? Like right now, I think there is not a lot of that happening. Mostly, I think what kids are hearing is social media is bad for you. It's bad for your mental health. Don't use it, which is not really realistic. And that's it. And they're not getting a lot of education and training around how can they actually use this in ways that work for them, that make them feel good, or make them feel better, where it's not interfering with other aspects of their lives. So I think it's something that we need to be teaching kids.
And part of as I was reading out your resume, part of what you do is you are trying to help parents learn how to help their kids navigate this. What are some of the tips that, if you can sort of whinny them down, what are some of the things you're trying to offer parents as guidelines for navigating this stuff?
I think this is a really challenging landscape for parents, as you can imagine. It's changing so fast. It's very different than what many parents dealt with growing up and when they were younger. In the past few years, since becoming a parent myself, I have young kids. I think I've become a lot more interested. In just how can we help parents, figure out how to navigate this, how to deal with these new technologies. And so, I think there's a couple general tips that I think are good to start with for parents. So, one is, which parents don't love to hear, but is important, is modeling, which is thinking about your own use of social media, actually, and your own use of technology. And we know that plays a pretty major role in how our kids use technology. And so starting there, reflecting on your own use. And then the other two tips I would say to start with are communication. So open communication, conversations about this, asking questions is really important. Getting curious about how kids are using these technologies, why, when, why it's important to them, what they like about it. I think we often come in with our own agenda, which of course makes sense. We're concerned about this as parents, but getting kids' perspective too is important. And then the last piece is setting boundaries around it. So The tech companies, of course, I think have a role to play in terms of making the platforms safer for kids. But I also think that parents can play a major role in terms of, setting limits, figuring out what the right boundaries are around this. And that might mean waiting a certain amount of time to get them a smartphone, for example,
Right.
or waiting until a certain age to give them access to social media. I think it can help parents to think about, what is kind of the minimum level of technology that is necessary for your child to meet the needs they have. So if they want to be, communicating with friends, staying in touch with their peers, maybe they can do that with a flip phone. Or maybe they can do that with like a smartwatch that's made specifically for kids. Or
By the way, that's what I'm getting my kid to be popular in school. And the first
a flip phone?
generation flip phone. I got it. It's really interesting. When I was on radio, LAUSD was trying to figure out how every kid could get a laptop. And being the second largest school district, I think, in the United States, they did it all wrong. And they went for pads with keyboards, separate keyboards, etc. I ended up calling and looking around at smaller school districts and figured out, no, it's a laptop and you need a keyboard. But the thing that I remember is they couldn't figure out how to block the kid. They put a blocker in the program so kids couldn't use the laptop or the iPad that they were giving them to do anything other than schoolwork. And the only two ways around that were put a little pin in it and reset the iPad, or type into the iPad, how do I get around the block in my iPad? I mean, it's like, it was so stupid. that adults don't, you're laughing, but it's more kids, young kids, have their own names, sign-ins that their parents don't know about, or they're logging in as their parents. And that pull of their peer group is so much bigger than what we're talking about also. That's the scary thing, and I know you're dealing with that.
Yeah.
Your research, because you got a grant to do research, when your research is done, who do you present to that may actually look at it and go, oh, wow, thank you for this. We have something tangible now where we can do something actionable, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different ways that after you complete a study, after you have findings, that you can share the findings. One of the things that I'm trying to do now, as you had mentioned, is trying to get the information directly to people who can use it quickly, like parents, parents, educators in schools. But obviously, there's some amount that can get to policymakers, like we've talked about. I think, I think it's sort of a question about like, how do we communicate science more generally? Like, how do we get the findings of science out into the world? And I think that landscape actually is changing a lot, interestingly, because of social media, where some of this is happening over social media. But yeah, I mean, I think that, there's a lot of different ways to get it out there, and I'm starting, at least right now, with trying to go.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the grant. And should we have panels of like 12-year-olds who are actually trying to get the solutions rather than adults who didn't grow up with social media and don't understand it? I mean, I watch senators and congressmen who are 82 years old who have clock radios that are blinking 12, who are trying to make legislation for social media, and they don't realize. One asked is, how do you make money? I mean, they didn't understand basic principles.
Yeah.
So these are the people making the legislation, which is really scary.
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I think that we do definitely forget sometimes to actually involve kids in these conversations, like the ones who actually know the most about how they're using these platforms and what's working.
Right.
I did this survey last year with Common Sense Media, where we went out and we surveyed about 1,500 girls, ages 11 to 15, across the US. And one of the things we asked them was, what changes would you make to social media to make it better? And the things they came up with were really kind of common sense, right? It was like, stop letting adults contact me who I don't want to be contacting me, or like, give me more age appropriate content to look at instead of things that I don't want to be looking at. Like they came up with things that are really make a lot of sense. And I think most people would agree with, but how to actually then put that into practice at the policy level is hard.
Professor, if I may, this may not be something that you can absolutely speak to, but on the hopes that you can, it would be helpful, I think, to a lot of parents. My boys are fully grown, but I remember when social media sort of started to come into its real heyday as they were becoming teenagers. And I had a very realistic talk with my boys about pornography online, where I said to them, look, guys, when two adult people agree on something and there's nothing that's bad. Everything's fine as long as those are circumstances. But until you understand sexuality for yourself, you might bump into some things online that are really disturbing or really shocking or really kind of blow your mind that are not appropriate for you at this point. So I'm going to beg you, since I cannot follow your every move, try to avoid going to these things. I understand. I mean, I had Playboy as a teenage boy. I understand you want to see what a naked girl looks like, but there are some really very frightening things out there. Same thing with this online bullying thing, which really hadn't become, to my knowledge, much of a thing when my boys were growing up, but seems to be so prevalent now. In those two specific areas of pornography, when parents sit down to discuss how a child is going to use their social media when the parent cannot see what's going on, is there a way to talk to kids about pornography specifically, or ways that they might open themselves to online bullying and what those kids can do to help themselves? Are there, do you have any insight on what a parent can say to have a real conversation with their child about this stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you were one step ahead of the game by just having the conversation, because I do think that that's the first thing, is that a lot of parents are just nervous to have these conversations. They don't know what to say. They don't want to get it wrong. And so they don't say anything. And we really do need to be talking to kids about some of these challenges and some of the dangers that are online. I think, so if there's one message that I think is important to convey, I would say it's one of non-judgment, right? So trying to convey the message that if you have questions, if you're concerned about something, if you see something you feel like you shouldn't have, I want you to feel like you can come talk to me without me taking your phone away, or without me jumping into something punitive. And I think it's really common for parents, very understandably, where their kid says they saw something or they bring something up to kind of test the waters. Parents freak out and get a little nervous about that, and then they put in more restrictions. Right. And what that shows the kids is that they can't do that in the future, right? They can't come to you and talk about it, because it's going to have negative consequences for them. And so I think, as much as possible, even though it's hard, really trying to approach those conversations with, thanks for coming to me. I'm glad you brought this to me. Let's have a conversation about what happened. What can you do next time? What did you not understand? Can we look it up together and figure it out, rather than, having a more punitive approach.
Right.
Wow, that makes sense, because we go right to punitive. We do go to punitive when you're panicked. Parents go to punitive. Yeah. Well, I'm taking your car. I'm taking your phone. I'm taking your things. So it's easy. It's an easy solution.
Punitive, but I don't know.
It makes sense.
I'm trying to think of what I might have done. Like if one of my sons had said to me,
but parenting, people go. The easy thing is
to go to
punitive.
But I'm trying to think, if my kid came to me and said, "Oh, here's this really sort of crazy thing I saw," and I don't know what the next part of my conversation would have been, other than, well, let's talk about that. Why did it strike you? Was it scary for you? Was it enticing for you?
You just keep asking. You're supposed to keep, instead of, because parents tend to jump, read this the other day, because I'm that parent, jump to solution.
You don't have to, quote, get it right in every conversation, right? Like it's not going to be perfect every time.
Where were you when I was raising children? I don't have to always get it right? That would have been a very good tip.
This from a new mother. Wait until you see.
Right. Let's talk to her in 5 years.
You've got years of getting it wrong that are going to bite you back by coming up. Because it's emotional. It's tough. How many hours a week do you spend on social media, huh?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, man. I don't know. I would say I mostly use Instagram. That's probably my main social media. And I go through phases of like deleting it off of my phone, and then it's taking a break and then re-downloading it. So, but I would probably say I spend like a couple hours a week. if I had to guess.
A couple.
So
That's two.
you're pretty good. You're pretty good.
Let me
mean,
understand
well,
this.
it
Your
depends on the day
entire
of the week.
reason for academic existence in this world is
Social
social media, and you're 2 hours a week. I am 9 hours a week, and I am not into this field whatsoever.
Well, a couple could be many versus.
Okay.
Hey, aside from
By the way, that is not to suggest that anyone using social media should not be following the Really No Really podcast. On the
Oh,
social
that
media
should be
site.
20,
Do
30
not
hours.
if you're going to start winnowing down, don't start there.
But I don't look at it as a site of social media. I look at it as an education.
That's right. It's an experiential.
Growth.
It's an experience.
It's an experience.
If you could snap your fingers, you may not have an answer to this, but if you could snap your fingers and instantly do one or two things to social media that you think would be a net positive, do you have any idea of what that would be?
Oh, that's a good question.
Is it really just more control by the user of what experience they have?
I mean, that would probably be the first thing I would say. Yeah, I think the second thing, just thinking about in parenting in particular, I think giving parents more options for how they navigate their kids' experience. It doesn't necessarily mean like they can have more control over the experience, but just giving them more options in terms of how they can, like right now, most parents are just kind of operating in the dark, right? They're just sort of like asking their kids some questions. Some platforms have started adding some, parent features where you can maybe see your kids' contacts or that kind of thing. But I think giving parents more options for that would.
So that's parental education. That's not only educating the kids. That's teaching the parents how to teach the kids and understand social media.
Because there are some, I don't know if they're websites or they're just programs that you use, but I know there's a thing where you could type in words or phrases and they would become blockers. That anything that had that word or phrase or would be banned from coming up in your show. I don't know if that's
I started the episode by saying, these tech companies can target kids with ads. I'm sure they know. How is that possible that you can target a 10-year-old with an ad of 20 things they're going to buy and you know everything about them? However, you can't block content from that same kid that you know who they are and what their age is. So that to me tells me if they wanted to. If there was an incentive that they could.
It's Russia.
It's not
Russia. I do. I think there's also what the algorithm is solving for, right? Like right now, as we don't know, but it seems like what's probably mostly being solved for is engagement and time. So whatever is making a kid or an adult stay on there longer, engage more with the content, that's the thing that's going to show up first in their algorithm and show up most frequently and do the best in terms of how popular it is on the platform. But there are other things you could solve for, right? Like there are other things you could be prioritizing.
Man, it'd be wonderful if we had a guest on who suggested, replacing hate and fear. There's got to be another more powerful emotion that can release dopamine that we can replace anger and fear for engagement. I know.
I told you, I changed my Instagram algorithm in 6 weeks. It was not hard to do. Well, it was very studious. So as I was scrolling, if there was anything in the first second it came up, if it looked like it was trying to give me the kind of news or information that would anger me or frighten me, or I would flip. So there was no 2 seconds of eyeballing it. Anything that was uplifting, entertaining, humane, charitable, beautiful, I started hearting it. I just started liking it. And within 6 weeks, I would say the vast majority of my Instagram feed are really kind of lovely things. There's very little on it.
So I did that too, and the problem is I'm getting cats playing the piano a lot. So
what's wrong with that? Why would you poo-poo? You liked it once. Why can't you like it 100 times?
Squirrels hiding nuts. It's
squirrels hiding nuts.
I'm learning nothing. Puppies.
Do you know? I just found this out. Do you know that squirrels cannot find 80% of the nuts they hide, and that's how we get trees?
Wait a whoa.
That is absolutely true.
Hold on. So this episode started out as we're going to break the code on social media, and the big wow on the episode is squirrels.
How do we get trees?
80? By the way,
they can't find.
Do they have
80%
guys
of the
following
nuts.
squirrels around? That takes a guy to find out.
We discovered on this show they're teaching goldfish how to drive. You don't think somebody did a study on whether squirrels can find their nuts?
Hey, Mom, I got a job. What are you doing? I got to find a squirrel.
I'm watching 3 squirrels.
And I see where they put them, and then I got to see how many of them can find them.
Right.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Right?
There you go. You didn't expect to come away with this kind of
We're
education.
here to teach you, Professor. My gosh.
Pretty amazing show, isn't it? What you learn here against your will.
I'm learning a ton.
We haven't figured out much about social media, but we can help a squirrel find
We
their
know
nuts.
that's
we know
right.
how to.
You know what? When a squirrel is in your yard planting a nut, put a little flag.
No, you don't
help
want
a guy out.
You want a tree.
Well, I don't know if I want a tree
Hey,
right
squirrel, Louie, here's where you put.
Yeah.
You know what I say?
Louie the squirrel?
If a
That's
squirrel can't
crazy
find
name.
his own nuts,
Yeah.
then boo-hoo to him. So
No,
thank you, doctor.
wow,
And
friend of
I'm
nature.
embarrassed that we went out on that. Did we do okay? Did we ask the right things? I hope.
No, yes, yeah, great questions. Great
Good.
question. I think it's a really, yeah, I mean, it's a really hard question to answer. Like, it's a really hard space, I think, to understand because
But
there's
we
so
got to
many
do
things
it. But we got to do
changing
it.
so fast.
Yep.
But you asked a lot of great questions.
And I'll tell you what we've accomplished. This episode will not appear in Australia come next year.
No, it will. I'm curious. It's a year away from the ban. We'll see. We should have you on a year from now to see how they enact it and
Yeah.
what's in place. It'll be fascinating to see what these legislators have decided. They haven't decided what apps yet exactly. To tell you the truth, I'm guessing it's TikTok, Instagram, whatever. But they haven't
But
even decided
4chan is
on that.
fine. 4chan, whatever you want to do.
And TikTok may be bought by then. The
That's right.
guy who owned Dodger
Yeah.
State, McCourt, Frank McCourt, is
Yeah.
trying to buy it and do this whole positive platform with it. But
Yeah.
we'll see. It's a big undertaking, but
Yeah.
who knows?
I know. I think a year from now, I think things are going to look really different.
Really
No matter what happens, I think
Yeah.
things will look
Really
different. So
different.
I
it'll be
can't
interesting to
imagine
see.
what makes you say that, but okay. What are you looking at me? What?
No, because I'm thinking about what she just said. How quickly this is growing, changing,
Yeah, it changes
morphing,
every day, right?
and we could either be less control, less knowledgeable, or more, depending on what these companies decide. With
And
them-
more serious about what we want to do, or less serious about what we want to
about
do.
the kids. Well,
So,
thanks for coming on, Dr. Nisi.
it
Thank
was
you
a
so much for
pleasure.
having me.
A pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Good luck with your work. We look
Thank
forward
you so
to
much.
Boy, do we need it.
Yeah.
Good luck with your kids.
Thank you. I'll need it.
Yes, you will.
So,
Yes.
yeah, all right. So what we found out is, yes, there is a problem. Yes, companies may or may not be working on it. I don't know. No one has a definitive answer on how Australia is going to pull off this ban, or if it's, or as you said, you posed an interesting theory about, is it just
This could be a shove it up your-
device to make the companies take
As
this
long
more
as I've been
seriously?
doing this show and radio, I learned over years to go, what's the real, because all these stories on, whenever you watch your favorite channel, whether it's Fox or CNN, whatever, there's an agenda.
Sure.
There's a story below the story why people do stuff.
Yeah.
It's not, especially if they're playing chess and they're smart. And all of a sudden, as we were talking, I thought, no, they have to be at least as smart as we are and know how are we going to do this.
Right.
So maybe it's just, we're not going to sit back and do this. We're going to start finding you guys. So if you don't incentivize and give us a reason, we're going to do this dumb ban
Right.
that we don't know how to do yet, but
Yeah.
we'll figure out
We'll
in a year.
figure it out.
We'll figure it out. We're going to threaten you
Yeah,
for an
neener,
entire year. Exactly. Entire year, we're going to threaten you. So
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, listen, I think this is one of the great challenges of our time. Seriously, I think the internet and social media, and we didn't even get into misinformation and disinformation and how that's
which is so dangerous. And
thrown
how
at
do you
us.
do that? How do you do that if it's my opinion and it's wrong? And how do you know when it's opinion?
I mean, the one thing that I had once suggested, and I've heard many reasons why it may not be feasible, is that everyone on the internet, in order to use the internet, just like in order to use a car, you have to have an ID and you have to be verified and you have to be who you say you are, so that at least whatever you post can be attributed to you and you're responsible for
and by
it.
the way, the social media companies know exactly who
They
you are.
do, but I mean, the reason
I know.
that, you know,
you're not held
anything
accountable
flies.
for
Right.
a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is, and it's mean. Somebody posts a piece of music they did, and if it's liked by 1 million people, 10,000 people are going to say something horrific.
Right, sure. I have a game for you, but I want to be able to include David. So, David, Google-HEIM, come on in. Tell us what we learned, what we missed, what we should know, what we don't know.
First thing I want to say to everybody out there is that tech companies are not our friend. These social media companies, they are not. I mean, if they invested half of what they're investing to give us the AI we don't want into safety features for adults and kids, I think we'd be in a better place. They don't seem to be interested.
One moment, David. The views of David Google-HEIM are not expressly the views of management or anyone connected to the Really No Really podcast.
Good luck.
What else, David?
Yeah, another thing I wanted to mention is the what phone people should give to their kids, whether it should be a flip phone and not a smartphone.
Yeah.
And obviously, your child will be mocked, and rightfully so. Who wants to be able to open those phones? But there are phones on the market that do that use smartphone technology. So you're not your child is not going to be outed as having a weird looking phone. It looks like your traditional smartphone, but has built into the core system safety features that block many things and then give parents automatic alerts on certain activity, on certain.
Oh, that's good.
That's great. You know what phone I bought my kids?
What?
The ARP phone for seniors. They can only use it.
Big screen.
I fall, a big screen, big numbers. I fall and I can't get up. Emergency,
Right. That's
emergency,
that button. Right.
and us. And that's it.
And a direct line to walk-in tubs. Right?
Exactly.
Wow.
It's a start. It's a start.
Just one more thing.
Yes, sir.
Here's a question for you. What percentage of the world's population uses social media? What percentage of the world's population?
World's population, I would say, I'm going to say more than 50, less than 100. I would put it at people that don't have access to that kind of stuff. I would put it at roughly 68%.
And I was going to go a little bit higher, like 75%, because I think we'd be surprised to find out, even in remote places, that people are using. You see them using phones, etc. So what's the number?
Yeah, you guys are close. Although, according to Bob Barker, you've gone over 63.8%,
All right. Wow.
Yeah.
which is over 5 billion people.
Okay.
Well, and here's a little game for both of you, because what we're using when we go on social media is we're going to websites. And I have researched some pretty crazy websites and what they do. So we're going to play a game. I'm going to name a website, what it does. You tell me if it's real.
So is this
or I made it up.
website real or made up?
Or
Okay,
made up.
here we go.
Ready? There's a website called Pointer, which shows photos of people pointing, and they will always be pointing at where your cursor pointer is on the screen.
Oh, that's got to be real.
Debbie?
Real.
That is absolutely real. Pointer.
Go in there now.
Eel Slap allows you to post a picture of someone on the screen and digitally slap them with an eel by moving the cursor back and
100%
forth.
real.
It is absolutely real. It is absolutely real. Bodily Fluidily features posters of close-up liquid stains and invites viewers to guess,
Wait,
is it
so
a
toaster-
bodily fluid
Start
or
again?
just something else?
It's-
A close-up photo of some sort of liquid stain, and it invites the user to guess if it is a bodily fluid or some other kind of
It's
liquid.
absolutely real.
David?
I would say it's not only is it real, it's sponsored by Dr. Pimple Popper.
Wow. I made that one up. That is a false one.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, we should get that going
do-
today. David, make a note. I'll
Here's
call
one.
you later.
Do nothing for 2 minutes. Offers static photos and video and challenges you to do nothing. Don't touch your cursor. Don't look away. Don't click on or off. If you move the mouse, it kicks you off automatically.
It's real.
David?
I'm going to say it's false.
It is real. Do nothing for 2 minutes is a real website. G-string. A solid vertical line appears on your screen. If you run your cursor over it, it produces the note G on a different instrument each time.
That has to be real.
David?
That's strange. Real.
I made it up. That's completely
Wow.
false. On the other hand, is the name of the site. On the other hand, challenges you to draw simple figures with your mouse using the wrong hand. Points are scored for accuracy.
They also, I mean, that's got to be,
Real.
I'm guessing it's real.
He's very creative, though.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
to hand
False. I made that one up.
Really?
Yeah. The most.
I think, hold on. I hate to say this.
I know, I got some ideas
because
there,
I love
right?
because I love Seinfeld, and I love that you got a Tony. But I think we just found your real
My niche.
Your real
We made it on my
niche.
thing. I got 4 more for
You
you.
can make a fortune with these.
The most seconds is the name of the website. Everyone who logs on adds to a timer that registers the total amount of time that people have stayed on the site. So you log on, however much time you watch it, it adds to the counter. True or false?
True. Sadly.
True.
That is absolutely true. And currently, the aggregate is close to 500 years worth of seconds that people have stood
Just staying.
and watched that thing. Here's the website. Has the Large Hadron Collider destroyed the world yet? You click on, and all you see is the word nope.
Wow, that has to be real too, because I don't think you would have made that one up.
That is absolutely true. Absolutely
There
true.
you
That's a
go.
website. Doppelganger. Upload a picture of your face, and the app immediately uploads a celebrity it thinks looks like you, then splits the faces in half for a side-by-side
That's
comparison.
I've used that. I think I've used that.
Well, if you have, I am owed a royalty because I just made it up.
Jeez.
Yeah. And the last one, rock, paper, scissors, allows you to practice your skill at the game rock, paper,
That's
scissors.
got to be real.
David?
No.
Absolutely real. Rock, paper, scissors. I got to tell you, that's fun coming up with things that you go, so crazy it could be real.
So let's say, as we say goodbye, if there's a developer out there who wants to help with stain,
Let me just say,
human
a
stain,
G-string, bodily
no,
fluidity,
bodily fluid, I think is the one.
and doppelganger. I am willing to
Pretty
talk
good.
about royalties.
Pretty good.
on
All right.
those, yeah. And hopefully the internet will not block it, and it'll be appropriate for children.
And that this
everywhere.
podcast will be changing to a whole
Australia
other,
will allow it.
whole other thing in the new year. Really, no, really.
Yeah.
It's just going to have bodily fluids behind us or stains.
Right.
Just stains.
Is this saliva?
Although you also came
Or
up with a
grape
good. I'm
juice.
not going to reveal what it is. Another a podcast idea. That,
Yeah,
that
that's
was
good, right?
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, you
So
betcha.
there you go.
So,
There you go.
ladies and gentlemen, that is our program. For those of you listening in Australia, good day, mate, and good luck with your band. Thank you, Professor.
But I'm on to you. I get what you're doing.
Yep, right.
You and your Bowie knives. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Jacqueline
Nisi.
Nisi. And watch your kids.
Thank you,
Make
David
sure they're
Guggenheim.
safe
Thank
out
you,
there.
Laurie Creamy. Thank you. Look at Laurie gave us the
Laurie,
wave off,
whatever it
the
is,
wave
I'm
off.
against it.